transient.
And he's living in Galway.
And not.
Just outside Gort.
I think you have 1 mile from the Galway border.
Yeah, but not too far.
Well, I sincerely apologise. Somebody, I don't know what they said, my hearing is very poor, that's where I got to hear. Anyway, all the best storytellers come from Kerry. Do you know what I mean? So absolutely, you are very, very welcome here. Now, I want to ask everybody, would you turn off your mobile phones, please, before we start? And there's some wonderful books here for sale. As Eddie has written, he's written a huge variety of books. Or not a huge variety, but a good number of books. How many are there, Eddie? 12?
There should be 22, but the rest are out of print.
Yeah. So at least 12 there, though. There's plenty of choice and plenty of variety. Make wonderful presents for old and young. And that's so I'm going to listen. We're going to sit back now, relax, and listen to your stories. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
There might be people coming, so let me just introduce myself. Now, the other thing I should say is I'm deaf in one ear. Something that has come on me for the last few weeks, and anybody who has suffered from it will know it's a most uncomfortable thing to be able to hear yourself talking inside your own head. And every so often I have to
Nasal.
Yeah. Those of you who have suffered from it will know that to catch yourself by your nose and blow out. Now, believe it or not, now I'm fine. Now I'm fine when I do that. And it'll only last a while though, it'll come back to me again, and it's most annoying. But however, normally I wouldn't use one of these at all, because it takes up a hand, but I do my best. Now, I do come from Kerry. I've been in Clare for 42 years, in a place called Crusheen. And yet, you're never really a native of the place that you have come away from. I have no real allegiance to. We'll say when Kerry are playing football, if they were playing Mayo, I don't care who wins. I don't care, let the best team win. I'd much prefer hurling than football. Hurling is the only real game. And there's a problem. My wife comes from Clare, from Ballyea. And yet, any time that Limerick and Clare are playing, like Limerick have had a great run now, I always cheer for Limerick, because my father came from Limerick. So there's always kind of civil war in our house when Clare and Limerick will be playing, because my wife cannot understand why I would be cheering for Limerick, because she is a Clare woman, and that is that. I don't give a damn. I don't give a damn. May the best team win, except that my father was from a place called Mount Collins, which was just across the river field from County Kerry, and, well, I'd like to see Limerick winning. Now, especially since, thank you very much, Limerick didn't win since 1973, and it was great to see them winning after all those years, just like Clare didn't win after how many years? God almighty, when they won in 2013, it was nearly 60 or something years since they won. And you'd love to see, I hope to God that Waterford will win now after how many Mayo, I hope they'll win, so it would be wonderful. Sure, if the likes of Dublin kept winning, or Kilkenny can win, forget about the game. They're all done. So you'd have to get a new team winning. The way the thing would go around. But I get great satisfaction from, in our house especially, Clare not losing, but to see Limerick winning, just for the sake of the row. Now, stories. Have you any particular type of story you would like to hear? Because this year I have been collecting and recording stories from old people for 50. This year, in September of this year, 50 years.
That sounds interesting.
September 1975, I started. That's a long time, and maybe it isn't. But I have, met all kinds, good, bad, and indifferent. And when I started collecting first in 1975, I met people who still remember the black and tans, alive, and sometimes had good word for the black and tans. Someone who knew them personally said they were gentlemen, more and more thugs, of course. And, like I was saying to that man behind there today, others of the Sinn Féin were Mayfailers. You got the same, good, bad on both sides. In my next book, Military Memories, I hope will bring out that fairness. Give both sides fair dues. Because there's no heroes that are all heroes on any side.
True.
There's the good, the bad, and the indifferent. People are people. We all know that. None of us are perfect. And all I'll be doing is, like in the black book there, meeting the other crowd, I let them speak for themselves. Just as I did in the other book there. This one here, The Man in the Big House, which is a man who was confined in a mental hospital for 30 years. Not put in there by the church or anything else, because you know nowadays it's very fashionable to kick the church. The church did all the bad things, but it really didn't. It did a lot of bad things, yes, we know that. But families did bad things too, to their daughters, especially.
The husbands to their wives.
And, of course, to their wives, and vice versa. Lots of bad things hidden in Ireland. And that man, the man in the big house, he inherited a big farm and a big house. But he had no interest in farming. And therefore his family thought he was a bit, and they put him in. And that time, all he needed was 2 doctor signatures. And of course they were easy to get.
The dotted line.
And they got him in there to the mental hospital in Ennis. And he spent the next 30 years there. But luckily, there's always a bright side. He pestered every government minister for health. And finally, one of them responded. Barry Desmond, in the coalition government, who ordered his case to be reviewed. And of course he was left out, but it was too late. He was, by that time, he was an old man, but he had proved his point. I'm not mad. And he was proud of that. And I remember when that book was published, he was so proud of it. I used to go in and see him on Sundays. And it was a case of, could I have another copy? Could I have another copy? He had given it away, and given it away, and given it. So how could I refuse him? Because it was his book. It's in his own words, as I recorded him. To tell his own story, and that's what I say on the back cover of all the thousands of patients who passed through Ennis Psychiatric Institution in its years of operation, 1868, 2002, under its various names. Perhaps only one, Jimmy Armstrong, had the opportunity to tell his life story personally in book form. And think of all the people in all the mental hospitals, because there was one in every county throughout Ireland, who didn't get the chance of telling their life story. When that came out, I got a phone call from a woman in Tipperary, because there was South Riding and North Riding in Tipperary. And it was from the South Riding down in Clonmel, the hospital there, the mental hospital there. And she said that her mother's uncle, he had a drink problem. And he used to be put in until he'd sober up again. And that was all that was wrong with him. But he had a habit of escaping over the wall, trying to get out. Because he wasn't crazy. He was just put in to keep him out of the way until he'd get right. Because the people at home couldn't mind him. They were elderly, and he'd get out over the wall So in order to keep him from doing that, you know what the authorities inside did? They amputated his 2 legs below the knee.
He's
No.
literally legless.
Hmm?
He's legless.
Yes, you could say that. But I mean, if that was today,
Sense of humour, guys.
that man would be compensated for millions. No, but there were the times that were in it, as we'd say today. So a different Ireland, maybe, but it was a cruel Ireland in some
Cruelty.
ways.
Still there.
And we hear
Just
about,
don't
you know,
see
the romantic tales about, maybe I'm wronging her, but Alice Taylor, you know, and to school through the fields. Yes, they were there too. But there was a different side to Ireland too in that time, which was a side to Ireland that if you didn't toe the line, I tell you, I know of a primary teacher who beat a pupil so badly that he died. There was nobody brought up for that. Nobody brought up for that. Why? It couldn't happen. Teacher didn't do that. But it did happen. It did happen. So I mean, now, what kind of story do you like?
Give us your favourite. What's your favourite in 50 years?
Just
It's
take
an
a look at your
impossible
audience,
question.
Eddie.
It's an
Just
impossible-
take a look at your audience and decide
It's an
yourself.
impossible question. I love fairy stories.
Ah, yes, absolutely.
I love fairy stories. Now, real fairy stories. And the real fairy stories, Irish ones, are like Grimm's fairy stories. You know, that can be, you don't mess with the Irish fairies.
Absolutely not.
If you interfere with fairy property, like a fairy fort, a fairy bush, in other words, a lone whitethorn bush, or a fairy path. If you build on a fairy path, you're in trouble. Because they're like us in every way. The fairies are like us in every way except one. They have no red blood in them because they're not human. I knew him for well over 30 years. He lived to be within 5 weeks of 100. And I was so sorry that he didn't live to be 100. His name was Mikey Griffey. And Mikey, as I say, I knew him for 30 years. I have about 170 hours of him recorded. He never went past primary school, but he was a philosopher, Mikey. I remember very well one of his statements. He said, if you're stupid at 20, you'll be stupid at 90. He said, if you're ignorant at 20, there's hope for you. Because a bit of education will cure that. But stupidity, nothing will cure that, because stupidity is bred into people. If you're stupid at 20, you're stupid at 90. But if you're only ignorant at 20, there's hope for you. Isn't it a true statement, though? And I suppose he knew he had lived to be 99 and a little bit. Now, he said to me that, and I was there with him one night. He said, and he was a man that when I'd come of a night, he'd always offer me a glass of whiskey, neat. And I don't drink whiskey, I drink Guinness. And he'd always offer me the glass of whiskey, and he had a big old open fireplace. He was a bachelor. And the house was filthy. No, not stinking, no. But it had never been cleared up. And you know, with a big open fireplace, bubbling tough, you know, there's always ashes. And it was Mikey, it didn't matter, but he was a generous man. And he'd always welcome me with a glass of whiskey. And I'd be there, we'd be sitting by the fireplace, and I'd be there, you know, throwing the whiskey into the ashes. I had to drive home. I didn't want bloody whiskey neat. And one night we were talking about the fairies, and just it came up, and he told me he saw them. And I said, of course, Mikey, what did they look like? And he didn't answer me for a long time, only looking into the ashes. And then he turned around and he said, and I always thought of it since, the person sitting beside you could be one of them, and you wouldn't know it. And if you think of that enough, it's a very frightening answer, because it'll tell you that they can take any shape they like, human or, of course, animal, because in a lot of the stories you'll hear of the fairies taking the shape of the black dog. A dog that is utterly black, not a white hair from his puss down to the end of his tail. And animals, always dark, to human. But they can, they're not the little, you know, in the children's fairy stories, not that. They can be just like us, but very, very tame, because they have no red blood in them. So, frightening. And that's why in so many of the old stories that when you had a good storyteller at night, big man mainly, sometimes women great storytellers too, that they could always pick out the person in the audience who had to pass whatever, because everybody was walking, the odd person had a bike, nobody had a car. When that person had to pass a certain place going home that had a reputation of maybe being haunted or something being seen there, that person, the storyteller, would concentrate maybe on that person and be able to frighten the living out of them. And I tell you, in a dark countryside, easy enough to be frightened. Most everybody here has been reared with light, electricity. But in the old style, well, you know that yourself, when the power cuts came there a couple of years ago, when everything was dark. Different world entirely, utterly different. I tell you, it's easy to be frightened then. And you know yourself, if, for example, you interfered with a fairy bush, that storm, Eowyn, or whatever they called it, I got emails and phone calls from the 4 corners of Ireland after that big storm recently, of lone bushes being knocked or half knocked. And what should we do? Will we try to put it standing again? And I said to people, no. If a case like that happens, that in that particular case, that storm was a fairy wind. That was a fairy wind, and leave the bush as it is. There's nothing you can do. Nothing you can do. If the bush is going to grow again, it'll grow again. But more than likely, it's gone. The only thing you can do is don't burn the timber. Because if you do, and for example, if your house, your chimney goes on fire and the house catches fire, blame yourself. That's what the old people always said. Blame yourself. So you took your chances with these kind of things. But you see, the modern generation has lost that kind of knowledge. The older people knew better. Now, where did the fairies come from? Old people around the fire at night. There was fun in the stories too, as well as knowledge. One of the stories to explain that, and it wasn't a book story like what the monks wrote down in the Middle Ages. They were different stories entirely, bookish learning. But what the old people told around the fire at night tended to have humour in them. And one of the stories was, when God was in his heaven, sitting in his golden chair, surrounded by angels and archangels, thrones, dominions, all the various of the angels in heaven, as we were learning at school. There was one of these archangels watching God in his golden chair, and that was the bright one. Who was he?
Michael.
Who did Latin?
Lucifer.
Lucifer. And he was there watching God, wondering, what would it be like up there to be looking down at where we are here? But, of course, it's all right to be wondering that, but to do anything about it, another story. You didn't contradict God. That was a dangerous thing to be even thinking about. But there was the temptation there all the time. Now, you see, God is like everybody else. He has to go to that place every so often. Tochamassel, as they call it in Connemara. And one of those times when God went out Lucifer, he had built up a bit of courage by this time, and he decided he'd jump into God's chair, and of course the crowd that were below, well, they had to adore whoever was in the big chair, the golden chair, and there they were bowing down as usual. And of course Lucifer said, when did I do this before? Wonderful, the comfortablest place to be in heaven. But he had forgotten one thing. You know, even brilliant people have a little kink of stupidity in them. He had forgotten that God would be coming back. And when God did come in the back door, you know, pulling up his trousers, and when he saw who was in his chair, he lost his temper and clapped his hands, and immediately the floor of heaven opened, and down went the chair. You know, gold is very heavy. Down went the chair, and Lucifer in it, you know, down it went, and not just him, but the ones nearest to him, hundreds of thousands of them, down like the stars of heaven. And now, of course, it was a lucky thing for maybe us too, that Michael the Archangel, the sensible one, he was over there in the corner making the tea, and he was standing on a rafter, which was even luckier again, and he saw what was happening, and he said to God, Master, he said, do something quick, or we'll be alone here. And God, oh, you're right, and God, he clapped his hands again, and everything froze where it was. But by then, of course, it was too late for the other lad, Lucifer, because himself and the chair were gone down into the black place, the pit. And, well, the ones that were still falling, they stopped where they were. Now, of course, the one nearest to Lucifer, well, they were with him in the dark place, but the ones still falling through the air, they stopped there. But the ones that fell to earth, well, into the hills, into the ground, they stopped there. But the ones that had fallen into water, lakes, rivers, seas, that's where they stopped. And that's how our ancestors, sitting around the fire, trying to figure out why is it that the devils, the ones that fell into the dark place, they'll always do you harm. No matter what you think or say or do, they're the bad lads. They're always looking for revenge because they know that they're stuck below in the darkness. But the ones that are in the air, they're the air fairies. And the ones that fell to the ground, they're the earth fairies. And the ones that fell into water, they're the water fairies. And they'll do you no harm unless you antagonize them. And that's how our ancestors, who weren't educated people and didn't have books, because Ireland was a poor country at the time, and arguing among themselves by the fireplace at night, that's how they worked out the difference. Their theology, the difference between the devils and the fairies, the different kinds of fairies, and they had a sense of humour about the whole thing. Imagine Michael the Archangel making the tea above in heaven, standing on a rafter. They had a sense of humour about their own religion. And maybe it would be a great thing today all over the world if people had the same sense of humour about religion as they had. Now, it isn't that we're saints or anything else. We had our own arguments about religion too for maybe too long. But the Irish maybe weren't the worst. Maybe when they had no education. So there was that angle to the fairy stories. Where did they come from? And around the fire at night, people try to work it out for themselves. Because it is a mystery after all. Where are they from? What would they do to you? Would they do anything? Would you have to antagonize them? The same questions are being asked today. I heard from an old man I remember the last crisis there in 2008 when the big crash came and all these estates were being built all over Ireland. The ghost estates. I had one old man. He said, weren't they all being built on fairy paths? Why wouldn't they be abandoned, not being finished here and there and there? You know what? Maybe he was right. Maybe he was right. Well, how do we know? Maybe they were all being built in the wrong place. So, you have to take some of these old beliefs, not with a grain of salt, as modern-minded people say, but just think, a man from Doolin in Clare, and he would never be let out by his grandmother without her doing two things. She would make the sign of the cross on his forehead in the evening with piss. Yeah. But you think that was the woman out of her mind? No, she was not. She was one of the older generation, and she knew that the 7 things that the fairies are afraid of are something holy, sign of the cross, something dirty, urine, for example, something red, the colour of blood. They have no blood in themselves. That's why, for example, that farmer taking his cow to the fair long ago would tie a little bit of red thread around the cow's horns. Just as an example, there's many other examples too of red thread, red anything. That's why people were afraid, for example, of a red-headed woman long ago. That's why a fox would never be allowed on board the ship long ago. Anything with red, there were so many examples of it. Something holy, something dirty, something red, iron or steel. Iron or steel, for example, a black-handled knife was one of the best things to have on you. If, just in case, you might meet the fairies, they wouldn't come near you if you had a black-handled knife. Not to attack them, but just to have it. You're quite safe. Salt, fire. And if you had none of those things, run if you met them, but there was no point in running, they'd always be faster than you. But if you got as far as flowing water, no matter what kind of a little stream, get across it and you were safe. They couldn't cross running water. So there were the 7 things that if you met the fairies, that would protect you from them. So they had their fears, and those are the 7 things that prove to us that the fairies go back into Neolithic times. They go back further than we can imagine. And you can measure all those things for yourself. Something holy, every religion has its holy things. Something dirty, we all like to wash. If you don't keep yourself clean, you're going to die of some disease or other. Something red, the colour of blood, well, you can imagine fighting battles. As far as human beings have been fighting, there have been battles. Iron or steel. Iron is a new weapon. Before that, it was the Stone Age. Iron or steel was this magical new weapon. From after the Bronze Age, after the Stone Age, came steel. A brand new weapon that anybody from the bronze is soft, iron or steel. This was the magical weapon that, so the fairies were afraid of it. It was obviously something new. And iron or steel, salt. Before that, hunters-gatherers had to eat their meat quickly before it rotted. Salt was like the invention of refrigerators. You salted your meat. It was brand new now. This was the brand new way to preserve what you caught, killed. Salt, fire. When people were living in caves or wherever they were, to be able to light a fire kept away the demons and the wild animals and all the rest of it. Fire was, imagine it for yourself. If you were able to light a fire, all those dark things out there, if you had no fire, even to cook your meat, well, you were bye-bye. And lastly, running water, you know what that does? Without running water, you're dead. That's why wells, and today after that in Christian times, holy wells, were such magical things. Running water bubbles up out of the ground, and it seems to be a living thing. So you put all those together, examine them, and you can see where the fairies would come in. So now, sorry, my tea, I always do this until my tea turns to pee. Breakfast time. Now, have you, many of you here, heard of Biddy Early?
Yeah.
You have, of course. Biddy Early was the most famous healing woman of the 19th century. Lived in Clare. Now, she wasn't the only healing woman, of course, but it's a remarkable thing that there were nearly always these healers. And of course, Biddy was the main one. She lived from 1798 to 1874. Many people thought, she's a myth, she's a legend, except 3 years ago, or thereabouts, I found her death cert. finally found her death cert, and the death cert of one of her 4 husbands. She had 4 husbands, yes. There's the death cert. Tom Flannery was one of her husbands. She married a father and son, also a father and son, and her last husband, when she was about 68 and he was in his 20s, she was an amazing woman in that sense too. Her husbands were getting younger as she got older, but there isn't a bit of proof, or there is no hint that she got rid of any of her husbands. What was happening, in fact, was that you see, Biddy never charged, as real healers never charge. They have the gift, and the notion is that if they charge, they lose their healing power. If you ever hear of a 7th son of a 7th son, or a 7th daughter of a 7th daughter charging for their healing, you know that person is a quack. They're not a real healer at all if they have a list of charges. That's not the real thing. Biddy never charged, but you can pay the person of your own free will if you wish. And of course, people who came to Biddy and were cured, well, it would be crazy not to give her something, and they did. But they were nearly all poor people who came to her, and they had no money, because this was in the 1850s and 60s when people were miserably poor. They could hardly pay their rent to the landlord's agent. So what they tended to do was to bring her poteen, because, well, poteen is poteen, you can brew it yourself or distill it yourself, and by doing so, you were fulfilling double duty. You were cheating the government, and you were providing something for yourself and a way of fulfilling your debts. They brought that to Biddy, and I suppose she accepted it, and she was a generous woman. What she got in freely, she gave out freely. But it got her into all kinds of trouble with the local women, naturally, because Biddy, like I say, what she got in freely, she gave out freely, and that there's free drink, there's always going to be a crowd. The local men, naturally, were visiting, and they always got the drink from her, and their wives, naturally, disapproved. The men would be there late at night, and, well, you can guess. There's never any hint of any sexual depravity, nothing like that, except free drink. And the clergy, of course, didn't approve. You know, they were preaching about, she's working by the power of the man below, and all that kind of nonsense, but she wasn't. Now, most of the stories about Biddy are, since it was about matters of health, they're not funny, because, look, sickness isn't a funny business, as we all know. But there are a few funny stories, and one of them is this. Where I'm living now, in Crusheen, in Clare, there was this poor man, and rent day was coming up. Rent day, Gale Day as they called it, came up twice a year. And if you hadn't the money for the landlord's agent, you know what happened? Out, depending on the agent. If he was the man who stuck by the letter of the law, you were out on the road. And it didn't matter if you had 10 children or no child, out. Now, this particular agent, he was one of those. And the poor man I'm talking about, all he had was 2 pigs to pay the rent. And you know yourself that at the time, outsiders, they thought of Irish people as Paddy and the pig in the kitchen. Of course, the pig very often was in the kitchen because people had to take care of their pig because the pig paid the rent. And you see, English people and other people didn't understand that when they'd be passing through. The pig was the man that paid the rent. And you had to look after your pig, because if anything happened to the pig, you'd be evicted. Money was scarce. Now this man had 2 pigs, and they had been fattened up to pay the rent. But where would he sell them? Galway was no good. Ennis was worse. There was a market there, but it was useless. So the only real alternative was Limerick. The biggest pig market in Munster was in Limerick. How many factories were in Limerick? There was Shaw's, there was Matterson's, there was 2 more at least. Oh, it was a big pig town, Limerick, that time. And he decided he'd take it to Limerick. The problem was, even though the railway was there, oh God, how many stops that time? It was all the steam, of course, and there was Crusheen Station itself, there was Ennis, there was Clare Castle, there was Ardsolis Queen, there was about 12 stops that time. There's only 4 left now, but the railway is still there, and no good to him. He had the price of the railway. He was going to have to walk the pigs. The problem with that is Limerick was 32 miles away, and you know yourself, pigs are bad walkers. They have only short legs, and these were 2 fat pigs. So he didn't get the loan of money from his neighbours to pay the carriage. His neighbours were as poor as himself. So he'd have to walk the misfortunate pigs. Now, 32 miles, too long, so he'd take a shortcut. He'd take a shortcut down by Tulla and Kilkishen and on and come out by Setrights. Any of you who have gone to Limerick, you always pass Setrights. It's before Bunratty Castle, and it's on the Limerick side of Bunratty Castle, and he'd save about 12 miles. He set off the evening before, and on he went. Now, he knew the road to Tulla. He had been there at many fairs. He knew the road to Kilkishen. He had been there too. But after that, it was the pigs were leading him. And of course, there was no road signs that time. There was no road signs, and the roads were bad. But anyway, on he went overnight. Oh, he'd have to stop, of course. Stop, give the pigs a rest, and on. But after a while, like I said, the pigs were leading him. And the misfortunate pigs, instead of going south, they started going north. And come dawn, showed the pigs, where were they? Except near Fecal, where he was living. And the poor old pigs, eventually they collapsed in a heap like that, turned over and legs up in the air. And no matter what he did, he could cajole, he could kick, he could attempt to get him going. The pigs were going nowhere. And the poor man never cried when he fell out on the road now. And a local man came at him. And he said, "What's wrong?" And yes, he said, we'll be thrown over. Shh. Says, "Young man, why don't you go to Biddy?" "Biddy who?" "Ah, yes, Biddy Early, of course, Biddy who?" "Well, where is she?" And he pointed him out. She was there 300 yards up the road, up the little boreen. And he says, "I'll mind the pigs for you." And sure, the pigs were going no place. What in the name of God, mind them. And on went your man, up he found the little Maureen up to Billy's house. The ruins of it are still there. I was only in it there last week with an American to show her where the bit of that little body at the little haggard is. And in any case, he was lucky that it was so early in the morning, because if it was later in the day, there'd be a quarter of a mile of people back. There always was, every day, at Biddy's house. Anyway, he took his place. There was only a few people in the little queue, and when he came to the half door, there was Biddy. And she knew him. She said, the man from Crusheen. And of course he was amazed. How did she know? But you could be after coming from Dublin, and she'd know you, and she'd know your name, and she'd know what brought you. It used to terrify people. How would she know? But she would know. And she invited him in anyway, and sat him down, and she made the tea for him. She was a very generous woman. And tell me, she said, now she knew, but that was only to put him at his ease. And he explained all about the pigs that were behind the road. She said, drink your tea and I'll be back. And she went up into the room. It was only a 2-room cottage, thatched. And a few minutes later, she came back. And she had these 3 little twists of paper in her hand. Now she said, put them in your pocket, in the safest pocket you have, which he did, inside his waistcoat, in an inner pocket. And she gave him instructions. Now she said, when you go back to the pigs, she said, first one of them, lift up his head and stick one of those where the sun don't shine. She wasn't a vulgar woman. She was never a vulgar woman, Biddy, and do the same to the second one. And I guarantee you, she said, you get to Limerick and all will be well. No, there were queer instructions, but he knew that you didn't question Biddy's judgment. So he thanked her and he put his hand in his pocket as if to pay, but sure, Biddy knew that the poor man had nothing. And she said, do what I tell you, and all will be well, she said. And he thanked her again, and off he went down, and there was other people coming up the little body now, and they could see by his smile that there's a man who got what he came for. And back he went to where the man was minding the 2 pigs, and well, he said, did you get? And he put his hand in, and he took out one of the, whatever they were, and rolled over the old pig, the poor old pig, and lifted its tail, and stuck this thing, you know where, and did the same to the second pig. Well, those poor pigs that had the ears down, exhausted, the tail went up like an aerial, and the same with the second one, and rolled over, and off they went like 2 greyhounds. And the 2 lads looking at it, holy God Almighty, and of course he ran after the pigs. Never got Billy, what do you do? And I tell you now, in through Fakeland, and people were only coming from the well, you know, it was early in the morning, and coming from the well with their buckets of water, and holy God Almighty, they saw these 2 big pigs galloping into the village, in and out through the village. And your man, maybe 5, 6, 7 minutes later, after them, well, they've gone that way, sir, they've gone that way if you're looking for them, and he out after them. Well, I tell you, Broadford was a few miles away after that, different direction, heading south, and it was the same reaction in Broadford. Now, Broadford village is that direction, and the RIC barracks there, at the butt of the village, the Violet Hill, and same reaction from people there. And he was falling behind now. He wasn't a young man no more. He was falling further and further behind. It was maybe 10 minutes before he arrived. Do you see 2 pigs? And no, they're gone that way, sir. And out he went after them. Now there's a big straight stretch out of Broadford on the Limerick Road, about 1.5 miles long, and sure, when he came in this side, they were gone around the turn at that side. I said, oh Jesus, he said, what did you do? And then he thought, did she give me a 3? He put in his hand, took out the tub and left down the trousers. He did the same operation on himself. Well, he had only barely time to pull up his trousers with his two legs without under him, and off he went like an Olympic runner. And he just caught up with the two pigs going into Limerick at Corbally Bridge. And he had to shout to lads there in Limerick, my pigs, he says, catch my pigs. No, you know yourself, inside in Limerick there's always fellas hanging around there. They're obliging fellas, and they're corralled old pigs for him. And, Christ, he says, he had to get his breath. And the two pigs now, they were purple from all the running. But they pointed him up anyway to Shaw's Baking Factory. And fair dues to him, they drove up the old pigs for him. And when he got up to the factory, the boys were out above, it was break time, and they're smoking fags. And when they saw the two animals coming up, I said, yes, what of them? What of them? And he says, where's the ganger? And the foreman came out, and he said, I don't mind pigs today. Yeah, he says, but are they pigs? Oh Christ, he says, oh, stop talking like that, I don't mind pigs or not. And the ganger examined the two pigs. And yes, he says, and half in doubt, he says, are they animals pigs? Because they had lost 2 or 3 stone with all the running. But in any case, make the long story short, he sold the pigs. He didn't get the price that he was looking for them, but he sold them. And he got enough for the rent. Now, that man, he could have got the train home, but he didn't. He went into a local shebeen and he got a bottle of whiskey and insisted on walking back all the way to Biddy's. Yeah. And he came to the door and he put the bottle of whiskey into Biddy's hands. Not a bottle of poteen, not a bottle of Rockgut, paint stripper as you might call it. He said, thank you, Biddy. Thank you very much for what you've done for me. And she took it because she knew he was sincere. And that man was able to pay the rent for the half year coming up, not the full year, but just pay the guild. Half rent. And that was part of the reason why Biddy Early is still remembered today. But she died in 1874. You might say a peasant woman. But she wasn't. She was a lot more than that. They used to say that one of the royal family in England came to her for a cure for a certain social disease. I don't believe that, but the very fact that local people could believe that a member of the royal family actually came to her, it says enough how highly her own people thought of her. She was a remarkable woman. That, well, she was. End of story. Crazy. But if you had trouble with the fairies, I tell you, she is the one to advise you also. And I was shown several houses around Clare, windows not boarded up, but built up with stones, where Biddy advised people that room, where the room was built up, it had been built onto the house and people had been getting sick in that room. People went to Biddy and she told them, we built to the west, close up that room or demolish it, because people will be getting sick in that room, or the room was built on a fairy path. She said, we made a mistake there, get rid of that. And you can still see some of those rooms to this very day where Biddy advised the people, get rid of it. And they did, and there was no more trouble. Remarkable what power Biddy had. And they said she inherited it from her mother. She was a herbalist too, no doubt about that, but she was a lot more. Now, I'm trying to wait. That was fine. Now, yourselves, what do you like? Now some of the stuff I collect as I collect. I don't say, oh, I want this or I want that. I let people talk, and yes, please.
Can I just ask you about a connection, possibly? between Bridget Cleary and Billy Early, where Bridget Cleary was called Fairy Wife.
She was.
And all of that association, which is
That was a tragedy.
absolutely.
That was a
just
tragedy, Bridget.
The way it was used.
Yes, that was a horrible tragedy where she wasn't.
Oh, I know she wasn't.
She wasn't that Bridget.
I'm
The
just
Tipperary
being
case.
interested in your,
Yeah, that should never have happened.
oh,
No,
sure,
that
we know.
was-
Yeah,
That was the Bridget Cleary case in Bridget Cleary case in Tipperary. It was that came to court, and I think the husband was he transported.
it wasn't the end.
He was, and I think should have been too, because it was just a case of ignorance.
Oh, it's pure ignorance. And it
Ignorance.
was what you said earlier about the man who was in the big house. It's always about land, it's always about,
Yeah, it was. It was a tragic case where she was burned to death, and you can see his mugshot even today. The mugshot of him before he was transported, and there was more to that. I was talking to some of the people around there, and there was stuff that never came to court. As you said, land trouble. It was an ugly case. It was an ugly case. There's a book about it.
there's two books.
Yeah, you're right. It is worth reading. It is worth reading because I sometimes listen in the pub at night to some of the boys, the local boys talking, and it would frighten you. How argumentative people can be about tiny rights of way and the size of the gateway and how they would strangle you. I wouldn't even get involved because this goes back through families.
Yeah.
It goes back through families. And a little bit of land, a plot of land. And what you want to say, of course, is, look, boys, there's the graveyard above there. And all you need in the individual 6x3. But people don't see that at all. John B. Kane was good at that because he had a pub too, of course, and he was just, Moll and Big Maggie and all those. The Field was a perfect example of it. The Field, his play. But John B. was a bit of a romantic too. John B. was a romantic. He told half-truths. I'll tell you, a good reason, a good part of that. I come from Brosna in Kerry. And in Brosna and Knocknagoshire were the one parish up to 1920. Now, they were separated in 1920, nothing whatsoever to do with the Troubles. They were too far apart, they were spread out, and the people who would have to travel to Mass from there to there, it was too far in the age of horse and cars or walking. So they decided to split the parishes and build a church there, rather than to having spreading, having to go all the way. It was a sensible decision. But in 1920, of course, at the height of the Troubles, when the Black and Tans came to Ireland, now, okay, so it was a bad year to have to do it. But when I was growing up in Brosna, we heard, which proves again that the same crowd was thieving from each other. Sinn Féin could often be robbing each other, one division robbing another. We heard, and it was part of our thing growing up, that the Ballymackelliget, anybody know here where Ballymackelliget is? It's between Castle Island and Tralee. The Ballymackelliget company came to Brosna and they robbed a house there, which was a big store at the time, Smith's store in Brosna, in the square in Brosna. The house is still there, but all the Smiths are long, long gone. But it's still there, a fine house and a pub and a general store that time. They came and they robbed it. But the local captain in our place, son Mac, he was a very straight man, in fairness to him, he would never allow anything like that. But he was away at the time, unfortunately. He would have stopped them and lads, put back. But where John B comes into all of this was maybe some of you have read his book, The Man with the Three Names, Dan Paddy Andy. Maybe some of you have read that book. And John B. wrote that book, The Man with the Three Names, the triple name. And Dan Paddy Andy was a matchmaker. And he had a dance hall at a place called Rain the Gong. Very popular, and Dan Paddy Andy was a very popular man. But he had a background. He was in the IRA during the Troubles. And his name was Dan Paddy Andy O'Sullivan. John B. never mentioned that. Maybe he didn't want to, that was his own business. But Dan Paddy Andy was one of the ones who came and robbed the place in Brosna. And when himself and another man who later became a very prominent Fianna Fáil TD, they came, and when they were on their way, they stopped in Knocknagoshel. And by the Battle of a Gun, they arrived at this house on their way by nightfall, and there was a poor old man. He was on one, you know, you've seen settled beds, have you? The settled bed was a bed that becomes a seat during the day. You fold it up and you fold it out at night, and it becomes a bed. A very lovely bit of furniture, they were very practical. And
Springboks.
there was an old man sleeping in the settled bed. And they rooted him out of the settled bed, out of the bed. They wanted to sleep there that night on their way to Brosna. And they did, continued in the morning to rob the place. And they did. And what they stole was 2 big rolls of cloth. And not what they needed them for. You'd think they'd take better, more obvious things. But stupidly. The rolls of cloth they took, they were forced to hand them back shortly afterwards because there were the makings of the local parish priest's suit. The idiots, they took the parish priest's suit, the makings of his suit. And of course at that time, if you stole a parish priest's suit, you would be read off of the altar. Very sheepishly, they had to hand the rolls of cloth back because of that. But John B. never mentioned that, of course, naturally enough. So he was very selective in his what he would say and what he didn't say. But when I was growing up in Brosna, everybody knew that and had a great laugh out of that about the boys who had to return the rolls of cloth and why they had to return the rolls of cloth. So now, how many of you have a pet? I'm sure everybody has a pet. No.
Well, for years.
Of course, it's a different thing in a country place. Maybe in a city place, it's not as...
Cat and a dog. Black cat.
Ginger cat.
Actually, ginger cats are very rare nowadays, and they're only males. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Well, there's one across the road from us, the big ginger tongue cat. And our only protection from him is my dog. And he'd take on the dog.
Absolutely.
They're bad tempered cats, yeah.
But you know yourself that Irish folklore covers every animal you can imagine.
Yeah.
Irish folklore, there's every animal you can imagine. But the most popular animal of all in Irish folklore, you'll be amazed to know, is no. And there are stories about a hare and very sinister ones too, about hare and old women.
The wolf.
No.
No.
Well, I mean the current animals that are still alive.
Oh.
Animal now rather than birds.
Fox.
And there are plenty of stories about foxes.
Seals.
No.
There's no
Cat or
like
the
seals.
horse?
You know. And by the way, you're mentioning a horse.
Yeah.
What are the 2 animals that can see the other world?
The horse, isn't it?
A horse and...
Cat.
No, funny enough. And you see cats associated so much with witches and that. No. A horse and...
A dog. A dog.
Yes, a horse and a dog are the 2 only animals, according to Irish folklore, that can see the other world living. Yeah. But the animal that there are most stories about in Irish folklore is the weasel. And it's an animal that you rarely see. I've only seen, I think, a weasel three times. And usually, you know, dashing out in front of the car, gone. Now, let me just tell you a quick story about the weasel. I was told by a man I knew extremely well. He's dead now. He died at the age of 98, and he was a great naturalist, the same man who had respect for all animals. But he told me that in Ennis time, in the bad days, there was a landlord, he said, and he wouldn't let local people down to the seashore when seaweed was badly needed. Because, you know, people who live inland don't know the value of seaweed at all, whereas people living by the seashore know that there's 100 different kinds of seaweed and there's 100 different uses for seaweed. You can have seagrass that you can eat, it is good for the blood. There is seaweed that you can spread on the land and is great fertilizer. There is seaweed that is used for iodine. There are so many of them, whereas a person who's living inland, they wouldn't know one from the other. Now, there's a certain time of year when the seaweed they call gurra in Irish is washed in, and that's the stuff that is very good to fertilise land. Now, this man told me that the local people that badly needed it, because back there in that part of from Donegal down to West Cork, all the farms are very bad because they're bare, they're small, and if you can't fish, well, you have trouble. And at that time, he said, poor people, there was no dole, and you needed something to fertilise the land. So they used to go out when they could, but on their little patch, the local landlord, he was so miserable, the old bastard, that he wouldn't let him go down off of the cliffs there. And they needed it. He had two agents, two bailiffs with shotguns, and they used them. Not afraid to, because the landlord, he was the JP, the Justice of the Peace. So, do you think that held up the locals? Not at all. What they do by night, then to decoy these boys up and down, and while they were being carried off here and there, the boys, they go down along the cliffs with their baskets, fill up the baskets, across the field, out on the road, and of course, the road is the public highway. Nobody owns the road, and the other part of it is between the cliffs and the water, that much, nobody owns that either, between high tide and low tide. So, in any case, this night, Jim, he was down, and he said, while the boys were being decoyed down here, he was bringing up baskets of it on his back. He was a big man, and so some of the others as well, and by morning time, he had enough on this basket, and he had his donkey, and he was delighted with his night's work, and he started for home. The daylight, and just as he was passing where the golf course in Lenihan is now, he had this fight going on, and he looked in over the wall, and there was a weasel and a rabbit, and the weasel had just killed the rabbit. Jim said, delighted with his load, and he said, there's my dinner for tomorrow. So he bent down and he threw a stone at the weasel, and the weasel ran. Jim went in over the wall, and he picked up the rabbit by the ears, and the rabbit was perfect, only there, where the weasel had killed him. Now, if it had been a dog, of course, the weasel, the rabbit would have been all torn, but there was only one mark in him there. So he was perfect. Threw the rabbit up on the load of seaweed and got up on the cart himself and on. But he was only gone maybe 10 yards when he saw the weasel walking along the wall after him, staring at him. So down on the road again. Now the roads in those days weren't tarred at all. Down on the road again, picked up another stone, fired it at the weasel, and the weasel ducked and ran. Gone. Up again on the car and on. Actually, he was only gone another 10 yards when there was the weasel again following him. Down, picked up another stone, and on again. And it was the same way all the way into Lenihan. Now he wasn't going into the town, he was turning off for Innisdiamond. And 'tis a dead straight road a mile and a bit into Innisdiamond. He turned left and stopped though before he went any further. No sign of the weasel. On he went. He went gone 20 yards above on the high wall, and 'tis a stone wall. There was the weasel looking down at him. You little bastard. He said down again, and he you second. And the weasel ducked, and on he went. And all the way into Innisdiamond, there it was again, no, down, no, until he got to the church there on the right as you're going almost over the bridge into Innisdiamond Street. And of course he stopped there. No sign of the weasel. Because weasels, as you know, they don't like company, they don't like hustle and bustle and all the rest of it, and there was no sign of the weasel. So he went across the bridge into Innisdiamond Street, and he told me, and Jim was a big man. I knew him when he was old, but by God, first thing he did was he tied up the reins of the horse and into a pub. Now a pub that he knew well, and he asked for a half one of whiskey. And there was 2 or 3 inside. Pubs didn't close that time, it was morning time, and his hand was shaking. And the boys asked him, "What's wrong with you?" And he told them, "What I'm after telling you now." And they started laughing at him. And Jim didn't see the joke at all. He drank it down, and out he went. And he checked again just to make sure the dogs of the street hadn't touched the rabbit. No, nothing. The rabbit was still there. And untied the reins and off up the street. His house was only a small bit outside on the inner side of the town, just outside the town. But he had a few things to get for his wife in one of the shops. So he stopped there again and did his messages, and on he went then. But he told me it was only a small bit. But the houses of the street behind him, small bit outside the town, he could see the gable of his own house, and he saw something else. There above in the ditch, on the left-hand side, sitting on his backside, watching him, was the weasel. "Well, you little fucker," says Jim. And he got off of the cart, and he down, and 'twas then he thought of what his grandmother had told him, that if you steal anything from a weasel, that he'll be back. He'll be back when you least expect him. When you're in bed maybe, of a night. And you have the door locked, and the window, but he'll find a way in. Down the chimney, he'll find a loose floorboard, and you'll be found in the morning, dead. And no mark on you except there, where he killed you. And he said to himself, "Is a rabbit worth that?" And he turned around and he caught the rabbit by the ear. And he said, "Here," he said, "take it." And he threw the rabbit to the old weasel. And the last thing he saw was the weasel dragging the rabbit across the field and out of sight. But he said to me, "How did the weasel know that I'd be taking that road?" Because in the middle of Innisdiamond, there's a crossroad, and I could have been going that way or this way. But how did he know I'd be going that way? He said that they're a queer animal. They have as much sense as ourselves, and maybe more. He said, "I had nothing to do with them," he said, after that. And there's so many stories about them that it make you wonder, why? So, and she-weasels are worse than he-weasels. They're smaller, but they're worse. And they always say, they say that weasels are the Danes' cats, because the Vikings brought them to Ireland as their cats. just as they brought foxes to Ireland as their dogs. And they say about a she-weasel, if she spits on you, because they spit like cats if you back them into a corner, if a she-weasel spits on your head, you're guaranteed to go bald. And your hair won't grow again. And that applies to women as well as men. So, I mean, it doesn't matter so much for a man, because look, roughly 1 in 7 men go bald anyway, a big deal. But if a woman goes bald, that is a big deal. So, people, you know, are inclined to be wary of them. Now, can I tell you one last short one? You don't mind? I have this from a man. You're all aware of Bunratty Castle.
Yeah.
Bunratty, it's a beautiful castle. Some of you may have had a banquet there. I passed it on my way up here today, and I'll be passing it again on my way down tomorrow. And I was told this by a man who knew it before it was done up in 1961.
Yeah.
He saw cattle inside it. Saw cattle inside it. And he and a few others from around there used to play handball up against the walls of it. But it was done up, I think, in 61. And he told me this funny story about it. He said, you'll excuse me 1 second, please. Fisherman's friend, they're great jokes. Come on, monster. He said, just up the road, the low road at the side of the castle, when it was in its heyday, 300 or 400 years ago. And the remarkable thing is that this man, he knew his history. This man, he was never married. He was, I don't know, he must have been a great listener back and back and back, because he knew so many stories about the old landlords as well. But you meet people like that if you're lucky, But he said that when the castle was in its heyday, way back, there was a man in charge there, the chief steward, and his name was Anthony Colpoys, Colpoys, very English or maybe Norman name. He was a very strict man, but honest, but you didn't cross him. And down the road from the castle, down the side of the castle by the river, there was this widow woman. I don't know what happened to her husband, but she had no husband there anywhere. And she had a son, and the son was the most useless, ignorant lug. He was all to best him to get out of the bed in the morning. And the poor widow woman, I mean, she could hardly feed herself, never mind feeding this Egypt of a son. And she was constantly begging him, wouldn't he please look for work with a farm, or go down to the castle, or do something. No, he do nothing. If he did get out of the bed in the morning, he'd be out of the door of their hovel, and he'd be there looking out at the river, watching the boats going up and down, and he'd be picking his nose and eating it, or picking his ear, or scratching himself. And eventually, the poor woman, she got so sick of it that she went down to the castle. And now the servants, they had pity in her, because look, that's how she was living anyway. They used to give her scraps of food when they'd be left over after the feasts in the castle. She had no other way of feeding herself, and that Egypt. But out of pure disgust this particular morning, she went down to the castle, and she said to one of the servants, could I please see Sir Anthony? They said, I'll see, is he in? And just by accident, Anthony was crossing the yard. And so the servant went in and said, Master, there's a poor woman here who wants to see you. And he must have been in a good humour that morning, because he came out and he recognized her, and she was down on her knees immediately and begged him, please, sir. Look, she said, look, what do you need, sir, madam? And she explained about the stew stupid son she had, and he won't do nothing for me. And she said, send him down here, and I'll straighten him out for you. And she was delighted, and she shambled away up to their hovel, and she said to her son, here both still at the door, ticking and flicking. Go down quick, Sir Anthony, he wants to see you. Huh? Down he went anyway, and Sir Anthony, he was as good as his word. He did straighten him out for her. He hanged him.
Very good.
You know, you wouldn't miss time going.
True.
It's 20 to 9. So now, is there any question?
Why did you become a storyteller? What was the...
By accident. You'll know, I was in UCG, and we had a professor, Professor Henry, and I was sent out by him. I was doing my MA in Old English, and I was sent out by him. He was doing a survey of for phonetics, and I was sent out to listen to old people's accents. And at the age of 26, what do you know? Nothing. Even though all the 26-year-olds now in the country think they know everything. But they'll find out eventually that they know nothing, I hope. But I was sent out to listen to, but where do you go? Luckily my father was a harness maker in Brosna, and you know yourself, all farmers had to go to the likes of him, just as all hospital people had to go to blacksmiths. They're all gone now. And while they'd be waiting, they'd be talking, just like at the forge. And he knew a man who, he suggested that I go to an old man who was in his 90s. So I did. I didn't know him at all. Jack Donlin Leahy, a wonderful man he turned out to be. And Jack Donlin, he had a brother who was killed in the First World War. Personally, he remembered the Boer War. He was born in 1890. So when he was at school, he remembered the Boer War, 1899, 1902. He remembered it personally because he told me that when the postman used to have letters to deliver to families, he wouldn't want to take them up long boreans. So what he used to do is he used to come to the school and give them to the pupils. Now, of course, if he was caught doing that, he'd be dismissed. But he used to give them to pupils. And the master used to ask him, any words from the war today? And of course, what the war was the Boer War, not the First World War. And so Jack remembered that. And his own brother was killed in the First World War. And how he was killed was a very, very tragic story. His brother was, he said to me, the landlord had a very low way of getting people to reclaim his land, including theirs. He gave them 30 acres of the mountain, an old heathery mountain, free of rent. And they used to reclaim it, pick and shovel and spade. And when they had it, rent free, and when they had it reclaimed, take it from them and give them another 30 acres, rent free. That's the way the landlords used to work. And it was only bog and heather. And finally, of course, when the Windham Act in 1903 came in, that had to change. But that's how they got their farm, by the sweat of their brow.
And they're doing that with the bog at the moment. They're reclaiming it to want to plant trees and everything else in it. There's actually quite a lot down in the Bog of Allen.
Oh, yeah.
There's a huge problem at the moment that land that are bogs that people owned,
Yeah.
and it's actually being reclaimed, and the government are encouraging these outsiders. It's not by Irishmen or Irish citizens, it's outsiders are coming in and
Well,
they're
that's-
allowed to take the land.
Well, that's why.
And
That's-
can I start to name a name?
Well, that's why the places like Athlone
I
is
didn't
being
hear me
flooded.
there.
Because the bogs are the lungs of the Midlands.
Yes,
This is madness to be cutting out the bog of Allen,
yeah,
because well,
Yeah.
we've seen that for the last few years, that the flooding around that loan is because the
Yeah.
bog is being cut out, because the bog was soaking the water and you cut out too much of the bog.
but
and
you
the
need
water-
it, it's very, it's biodiversity and that's it, you need it.
Absolutely, you need it. Now they're having to
Yeah,
re-wet it.
yeah,
Stupidity. But
yeah,
you can't talk to people. You can't talk to people, unfortunately.
yeah.
I don't know. But sorry again,
That's
you were saying?
break or anything. Oh,
Oh, why did you become a
is there-
storyteller?
Uh,
How did you become a storyteller?
accidental. I had so many of these people. My father was no storyteller, my uncle was. My uncle was good at these. My uncle was great at funny stories against the clergy. But the clergy had never any, they were all funny. And the clergy used to admire them, enjoy them every bit as much, because there was no malice in them. There was never any malice in the stories that my uncle used to tell against the clergy. I think they used to laugh at them every bit as much as, because we have enough malicious stuff. That you have them in the newspapers all the time, and enough of that. I think we've seen too much of that. But there was fun too, and I always was of the opinion that in spite of you have bad people in every walk of life, but there's two kinds of job. They're the most lonesome jobs in the world: the guards and the clergy, because the guards are constantly being moved around and around and around, and they have no roots anywhere, and the clergy also. It's a lonesome job.
Very true.
It's a lonesome job. Because you have no family, you have no real roots anywhere. I don't envy them. I really don't. And most of them did a good job. Most of them. You're going to have bad people in every walk of life. In every walk of life. So it's easy blame. It's easy blame. Any fool can blame. So, but if I had any more, one short one, let me see, just one more short one, and we'll leave it at that. A man told me this, and he said he saw it himself, that he used to visit these old people in Colbert. There's many different stories, there's many different names for it in different counties. When people used to visit each other at night, when there was no television, when there was only very few people had a radio, you visited your neighbours. Still do. You'd be surprised, people still visit. There are still that kind of people left. I used to visit two old people in Crusheen up to last year. They were both in their 90s, both of them died only recently. It was a pleasure to visit them. The old man would come in the door and he had always television on, but the television was only for company, and he'd always say, turn off those fucking box, because the television was only for company.
I understand
But
that, yeah.
he told me he was a great hurler in his day, and he was known for attacking referees. I mean, physically, he was a savage man, about 6'5". Now, he couldn't help himself. He was noted as a rough player. I wouldn't have played against him. He was an animal, but he was a pleasure to talk to. If he didn't like you, he'd say it. But he was a witty man, because he had a knack of telling a story. And like I said, if he didn't like you, he'd say it. And to me, that was a pleasure. Because all I do now when I'm transcribing the tapes or the MDs anymore, I just underline story so that when I'm going back in them, I can play that part of it again, and I know it'll be hilarious to listen to. But in any case, he told me that a man, now it wasn't himself, but a man told him this, that one night he was visiting these two neighbours. They were old people, their families were gone, and he used to visit them because of that. It was nice to visit. And they had an old style fireplace. It was just, you'd sit there, you'd sit here on the hob, and they'd be talking about the match of the day or the price of cattle, anything. But he was visiting at one particular night, and he was, now the same man, he was about 3 fields away, and on a fine night, he'd shortcut across the field, and he'd come in at the corner of the cowshed. There was a little gate there. On a wet night, he'd go around by the road, to save his boots. But on this particular night, a lovely moonlit night, he came in, as usual, by the corner of the cowshed, in, across the yard, in the door, and they were talking away inside, and the woman of the house, she made the tea, but he'd always be gone by about 11 o'clock. He had a habit of that. So, at the time, we got up to go, but the man of the house said, yeah, he said, tough, have another cup of tea. Oh, jeez, no, he said, no, I'll be going, but I'll be back again on Tuesday night. Well, the man said, you mightn't go. And he said, I'm going. And out he went, good night. And across the yard the way he had come. But he said, I was only halfway across the yard towards the little gate at the corner of the cowshed when I had this pucking of the ball and the shouting. And I said to myself, Christ, he says, who's playing a game at 11 o'clock at night? A hurling match, obviously. They could hear the shouting. Christ, he says, I must have a look at this. And it was in the field, just on the, but I mean, he said, there was a small hill there. Who would be playing on the side of a hill? Anyway, on he went. About halfway across the yard, there was a hand laid on his chest. Now, he saw nothing, but there was a hand laid on his chest, and of course he stumbled back because he wasn't expecting it, but righted himself and forward again, but there he was, held. No, he was a big man, like I said, big man, and he was going no place. And he knew it. So by God, he said to himself, and the match was still going on, he'd go back, and did. And when he went into the kitchen, there was the old man and the old woman still sitting as he had left them. And the man of the house said, oh, you came back. He said nothing, and he sat down where he had been. And the man of the house said to his wife, make a cup of tea for him. And in the old houses, the old black kettle would be always hanging in over the fire. And she did, made the cup of tea for him again. And he didn't drink it. He couldn't. So we got anywhere. They were there, and there was no word spoken. He couldn't. So, after a while, maybe 10 minutes, which seemed to him like an hour of silence, the man of the house looked up at the clock, and he said, could be going now. He said, they're finished. He did. He got up, and he was there like a fool. He did go. And he stopped outside the door. He pulled the door after him, and he was there looking. And he said, I was wondering, will I go that way, or will I go by the road? But he said, I had to go that way, across the yard. Because he said, if I didn't, I'd never again go that way or come that way. And he said, I did. Carefully, but I saw nothing or heard nothing. The game was over. It was finished. But he said, They were there that night, of course. The fairies. And he said, huh? Well, he said that anyone who thinks that they don't exist, he said, is a fool. And he said, I never forgot it. The hand, and I saw nothing. It was there holding me back, and I could not move. So he said, they're in it. He said, they're in it, and that's as sure as, well, as he said there, as sure as I'm standing here. So you can make what you like of it. But that's the reason why, you know, the black book, as I call it,
We'll switch on the light.
It's on the light there.
you know, meeting the other crowd, if anybody had told me when that was published first, yes please, thank you, you know what it is, that would go to 17 printings, and it has, in what, 25 years now, it has never gone out of print. And it has been published in Chinese, in Japanese,
Wow.
in Italian, and it was used in the textbook in Moscow University. Never with the #1 bestseller, which means nothing, of course. They use that constantly in books just to make it seem, but that has never been #1, but it has never gone out of print in 25 years, which
Says
I would
a
never
lot
have
about
thought.
it. Yeah.
Never have thought, and it will never go out of print as long as Gillen Macmillan keep it in print. No, but it's one of those things that people are just interested in. So, but again, I let them tell the stories in their own words. All I do, they're not my stories, and I always emphasize that. All I do is I put a little piece in between the 76 stories just to put them in context. That's all, and the preface and the introduction. The only thing I'm sorry about is the woman who, Caroline Green, she's dead since. And she committed suicide, which was a terrible, sad thing.
Oh.
And she was a lovely woman, and only for her, that book would never have seen the light of day, because she was the one who got me to get him off my recordings and my shelves at home and get him in book form.
Encourage you.
And I'd have a second volume of it as soon as I finish the next book, because I do have the material for another book of them. So it will be done if I live.
Thank you.
But I never thought I'd get to be the age of 75.
You're a spring chicken.
Why not?
Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
Delighted to be here, and delighted that you were able to come along.
Thank you.
I never saw a man make less use of a microphone in my life. Eddie, that was
Forgetting.
that was really excellent. That was absolutely superb. We could have listened to you for another hour. So Eddie has books there. He has there's at least 12 different books there.
And DVD and
DVDs and yeah, all sorts of everything. If you want to buy, he's very happy to sign them for you. And Eddie, I can't believe we haven't seen you before. Do you know what I mean? I really can't believe you haven't been to the United Club previously. But we really want to thank you on my behalf and on behalf of our audience here. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I will be getting to the Bram Stoker Festival again in October. That is Bram Stoker Festival. I'll be getting to that again sometime in October, I think it's on. So, which is it isn't often I get to Dublin. So,